Does Star Wars Legends even matter anymore? After Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, they looked at all the books and comics that had been published over the decades and took them out of canon. Does that mean they're essentially useless? Absolutely not. I'm Eric, welcome to Youtini, and today we're going to see why Star Wars Legends may actually matter more than ever. Last week, we talked about the difference between Star Wars canon and Legends. So if you missed that and you're still a bit confused about it, pause this video real quick, check that out, and we'll see you back here in a minute. Once folks find out about the dichotomy of canon and Legends in the Star Wars universe, especially new readers, we've seen that they tend to focus mainly on canon titles. And it makes sense to a certain extent. After all, part of the fun of Star Wars is focusing on what's going on right now. The universe is always changing, and being the most up-to-date on new projects within the fandom is an absolute blast. But that doesn't mean you should miss out on a massive part of what makes Star Wars incredible. Because that's what Legends is. Incredible. It's a cornerstone of Star Wars history, and today, we're gonna go over why Legends will always stay relevant by diving into the past, examining the present, and focusing on three crucially important factors. How Legends saved the franchise, how Legends expanded the franchise, and how Legends inspires the franchise. It's almost hard to remember a time where there wasn't constant Star Wars content. Nowadays, we're spoiled in the best way with multiple books every year, weekly comics, and something that used to seem impossible, a plethora of in-universe TV shows. And even though we're getting all of that, sometimes we feel unsatisfied. I mean, after all, it's been 5 whole years since the last theatrical Star Wars release, and that feels like an eternity. But to put it in perspective, we have to remember that between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace, there was a 16-year gap. No sequels, no prequels, and definitely no live-action TV shows. But this is where Legends comes in. The first Legends book was technically released in 1978 with Splinter of the Mind's Eye, essentially a made-for-TV sequel to A New Hope. And the 80s brought us a few eccentric stories like Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, and the sensationally titled Lando Calrissian and the Mayan Harp of Sharu. But there was never enough content to really fuel the franchise continuously after Episode 6. That is, until 1991. This was the year that everything changed thanks to Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire. 8 years after we last saw Luke, Han, and Leia celebrating on the Forest Moon, Zahn's book introduced an Episode 7 that saw the continuation of the saga, as well as the introduction of the most formidable foe since Darth Vader, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Heir to the Empire was a wild success, hitting #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and remaining on that list for a total of 19 weeks. Not only did this provide the Star Wars community with a phenomenal new story, it also sent a very clear message to the entertainment industry. We want more. Thus began the golden age of Legends. From 1991 to 1999, the fervor for Star Wars skyrocketed to levels not seen since opening night 1983. Not only did fans see the conclusion of Zahn's trilogy, effectively his episodes 8 and 9, but we were treated to the Rogue Squadron series, more Han Solo trilogies, books about the Solo twins, and so much more. Thanks to Legends books, Star Wars remained in the zeitgeist of popular fandom throughout the decade. For a franchise in desperate need of new life, these stories saved it by filling the galaxy once more with new stories, new lore, new characters, and that excitement ran all the way up until one of the biggest moments in the history of Star Wars, the opening of The Phantom Menace. And that's where the expansion truly began. It's always funny how history gets rewritten. Nowadays, a lot of folks remember The Phantom Menace as somewhat of a failure, and while everyone is allowed their own opinion on the film as a whole, the fervor at the time of release was undeniable. After all, this was the creator himself returning to give us a trilogy about the creation of Darth Vader. He was going to change the face of filmmaking forever with new technology, fully digital creatures. I mean, people literally bought tickets in droves to see Meet Joe Black purely because the trailer for Episode 1 played beforehand. I mean, thank God for YouTube now, huh? But how does all of this relate to Legends? Well, see, before The Phantom Menace, Legends books told some really amazing stories around the original trilogy, and of course they carried the story forward past Episode 6. But with the prequel trilogy came an exponential amount of new Star Wars lore, and the floodgates opened to create a truly expanded universe. Now, when we talk about the EU, we so often think about the literal expansion of additional planets and characters, but during this period, Legends expanded the fabric of what Star Wars meant. We took the word Sith and expanded that into the Darth Bane trilogy and the tragic tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise. We took the beginnings of the Clone Wars and created the framework for the whole conflict before the show was released, all the while constantly expanding the timeline forward towards the climactic events of the Fate of the Jedi series and back into the chaos of the Old Republic. Star Wars lore became so rich and so beloved throughout the decade after the prequels, and then in 2012, George Lucas decided it was time to move on. He sold Star Wars to Disney, a new canon was established, and the golden banner of Legends became the new law of the land. This was a hard decision to accept for many fans, and some even felt betrayed or left behind by a franchise that had meant so much to them for so many years. But luckily, that's not remotely the end of the Legends story. When the Disney acquisition went through and the creation of Legends was finalized, there was a sense of worry that spread throughout the fandom. Will we be forgotten? Were all those years wasted? Has Star Wars turned its back on its true fans? Well, luckily, the answer to those questions were no, and shockingly, no. While the addition of the Golden Banner did mean that the Legends timeline was now fixed with the canon timeline taking over, that didn't mean in any way that Legends was done inspiring the franchise. In fact, it was barely the beginning. And we see this inspiration everywhere. The most obvious example of this is clearly Thrawn, who made his way all the way from the 1991 bestseller list to become the lead of 2 new trilogies, as well as the main antagonist in 2 separate TV shows. We have the Night Sisters and the existence of Dathomir coming from the courtship of Princess Leia to be featured in the Clone Wars, as well as Jedi Fallen Order. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's Darth Bane appearing in the Clone Wars, a KOTOR's own Darth Revan being mentioned in the Rise of Skywalker visual guide, Scorch from Republic Commando on screen in the Bad Batch alongside freaking Mount Tantus, and most recently, the all-powerful Cortosis medal from iJedi and Bane becoming a main piece of the Acolyte's immaculate fight scenes. Now, all of these examples could theoretically be written off as simple fan service or one-and-done Easter eggs, but there's so much more than that. Because the magic of Legends is that all of these stories that saved and expanded Star Wars for decades had an unintentional side effect. They also created a nearly endless well of references and ideas that can be used to inspire future canon stories. And there's a simple reason why. All the people making Star Wars right now, what do you think they were reading in the 90s and 2000s? Legends. And this is a key piece of the puzzle that a lot of folks forget, and it's such a key factor when it comes to the importance of Legends. Even though it feels like it's been forever, those stories were all written in the last few decades. And the current writers and filmmakers not only grew up alongside them, some of them even wrote them. So why wouldn't they want to bring in their favorite characters or planets or lore when they're creating new Star Wars tales? At the end of the day, creators are simply fans with a special set of skills. And that becomes more and more apparent with every single new project. But all that being said, Legends stories are not merely relevant only because they might someday be used in canon. That's great and all, but don't get me wrong, these stories stand on their own merits. In some cases, they represent some of the best storytelling that Star Wars has to offer to this day. After all, one of the biggest issues that some folks have with canon books is that some stories aren't complete or don't contain the full amount of epic scale that was once found along the Legends timeline. Because if you want to read Legends, you have completed series like A.C. Crispin's Han Solo trilogy and the aforementioned Darth Bane trilogy, alongside 19 book behemoths like the New Jedi Order. And if you're asking for climactic events that truly matter on a galactic scale, well, sometimes that's a bit easier to put into your books without additional movies or TV shows hogging the storytelling real estate. And at the end of the day, a good book is simply a good book. And whether characters and storylines from Legends make their way into canon or not, you can't help but realize how lucky we are as fans to have so many stories to choose from in 2 rich, diverse timelines. It's the best of both worlds. The separation of canon and Legends was a watershed moment in Star Wars history. And even though there are wonderful stories in both timelines, there are definitely some folks that will always feel slighted, and there are others who will never cross that line to go back into the Legends pool. And that's okay. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But when you look at all that has happened in the last 10 years of Star Wars publishing, as well as the quality of the Legends books that keep getting published to this very day, thanks to the Essential Legends collection, an initiative that is reprinting a ton of Legends with brand new covers, the value of these stories, it's undeniable. And to think that their relevance ceased the moment that a banner got put onto their covers diminishes them and robs every reader of hundreds of fantastic journeys through a galaxy far, far away. So if you've never taken those particular journeys before and you want to jump into Legends for the first time, be sure to check out our Youtini Essential 6, which has a healthy mix of canon and Legends for new readers, or you can even check out our Ultimate Guide to Legends, both of which are linked in the description down below, right next to the like and subscribe button if you feel so inclined. And finally, if you want a community that loves these books as much as you do, no matter how long you've been reading, be sure to check out Legends Look Back, our official podcast dedicated to all things Legends. Nobody does it better. So, will Star Wars Legends always be relevant? Well, there's no question in my mind. How about yours? Until next time, may the Force be with you.